5 unspeakable wonders shook the world the moment Jesus died. You might never see the cross the same way again. 4. The instant Jesus exhaled his final breath wasn't just the conclusion of a man's life. It was the moment time itself cracked and the heavens held their breath. It wasn't simply a death. It was the surrender of the author of life to the grip of death, voluntarily, completely, painfully. In that moment, a shift occurred. Not just in theology or belief, but in matter itself. The ground, the skies, and the unseen spiritual dimensions all trembled. This wasn't a man dying. This was creation convulsing as its creator was crucified. Picture yourself at the base of the cross as the sky turns black without warning. Your instincts scream that this is not weather, it's judgment. The wind hisses like something unseen is breaking loose. The ground shakes. Nearby tombs split open. Inside the temple, the veil tears from top to bottom. Even the Roman guards, brutal and unshaken by horror, freeze in dread. The crucifixion wasn't a scene of quiet sorrow. It was a storm of the divine that tore through both heaven and earth. Something broke that day that still hasn't been repaired. Scripture tells us 5 events happened immediately when Jesus died, each one a miracle that defied nature, each one a symbol that pierced deeper than the flesh. These weren't just signs, they were declarations. Heaven roaring into earth, God tearing the silence, the cross disrupting every false foundation. And here's the question left behind. If even the dirt trembled at his death, why are our souls so often unmoved? Stay close, because what you're about to uncover is not just supernatural, it's sacred. Number 1, the earth shook violently. A cry from the deep first. The earth convulsed. A cry from the deep. Was it God's judgment or his grief? When Jesus surrendered his spirit, the world didn't respond with silence. It roared with a quake so violent it split solid rock and shook Jerusalem to its knees. Matthew 27:51 makes it clear. At that moment the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split. This wasn't metaphor. It was seismic truth. Now picture it. You're there. Hours of unnatural darkness have pressed on your chest like a weight. Then Jesus cries out, and as his final breath fades into the air, the ground beneath you groans and erupts. Screams echo, horses rear in panic, soldiers drop their weapons. The earth isn't shaking in one street, it's roaring across the land. Not by chance, not by fault lines, but by divine reaction. This wasn't geology, this was theology. The earth was mourning its maker. Throughout Scripture, earthquakes often accompany divine encounters. Sinai quaked when Moses met God. Elijah heard God's whisper after the earth trembled. Now, at the death of the sun, the planet convulses, not in chaos, but in holy terror. Was it wrath then? God judging sin once and for all? Or was it sorrow? A mourning so deep that even creation couldn't hold it in. Maybe it was both. Maybe it was the judgment of evil and the funeral cry of heaven meeting in one violent shudder. Theologians call this quake the beginning of the new covenant. Hebrews 12 says, God will shake not only the earth but the heavens, removing what can be shaken so that what cannot be shaken may remain. That shaking started here. Religion cracked, rituals crumbled, grace emerged from the rubble. And here's the sobering truth. If rocks knew to split when Jesus died, how dare we remain whole? If soil trembled, how can our hearts stay hardened? This quake wasn't just the earth crying out. It was an invitation, a warning, a call. And maybe your world is trembling today. Maybe your foundations feel unstable, but what if the shaking isn't punishment? What if it's mercy? What if God is still shaking what can't last, so that what's eternal in you might finally rise? The ground shook when Jesus died, and it still shakes. Today, let it break what needs to fall. Let it leave behind only what is unshakable. Faith, hope, Christ. Now picture it again. You're there, dust in the air, the stench of blood and sweat clinging to your throat. The sun hasn't shown its face for hours. A silence has settled over the crowd, not peaceful, but electric, like the sky itself is waiting for something. Then Jesus gasps, cries out, and entrusts his spirit to the Father. And just then, the ground lets out a deep groan. It starts as a vibration beneath your feet, subtle, almost like a warning. Then comes the jolt, violent, unmistakable, screams erupt, soldiers fall, animals bolt, the city shakes like it's being torn in two. This isn't a tremor. This is a reckoning, and it wasn't chance. This wasn't nature acting on its own. This was nature reacting to the supernatural. The earth itself couldn't stay silent as the Son of God died. This was no ordinary quake. This was the ground convulsing as it absorbed the moment the author of life yielded to death, as if the fabric of reality groaned, unable to bear what had just occurred, as if the rocks themselves wanted to cry out what humanity dared not say. In Scripture, earthquakes don't come uninvited. They arrive with divine presence. They signal judgment, revelation, glory. When Moses spoke to God, mountains trembled. When Elijah listened for his voice, the earth roared first. Now, as the perfect Son dies, the world answers, not in silence, but in seismic agony. Was it wrath or was it sorrow? It was both. This quake was heaven's judgment crashing down on sin, on every dark force, every rebellious heart, every whispered lie from the garden to the cross. But it was also the cry of a grieving father, mourning the death of his perfect Son. The only man who had never strayed was nailed to wood by those he came to save. Mercy was rejected, love was crucified, and all creation groaned in response. Hebrews speaks of a shaking meant to strip away the temporary, shaking to reveal what cannot be shaken. That's what happened on that hill. Rituals cracked, systems collapsed, religion trembled, and from that ground, grace rose. But this isn't just history, this is invitation. Because if even dirt knew to quake at Christ's death, what excuse do our hearts have for staying numb? If the soil responded, if rocks shattered, how can we go on unmoved, unbothered, unchanged? This wasn't merely the end of an age, it was the beginning of a kingdom. A door opened between heaven and earth, and it was unlocked by a world that trembled beneath the weight of divine sorrow. Maybe your world is trembling too. Maybe the foundations you trusted are fracturing. Maybe nothing feels secure anymore. But what if that shaking is mercy? What if it's God removing the unstable to reveal the eternal? He shook the earth when Jesus died, and he's still shaking what doesn't last, so only what is unshakable remains. Let him shake your heart until all that's left is faith that cannot be moved. Number 2, the veil was torn, a sacred barrier shattered. Number 2, the veil was torn, heaven opened, and fear rushed in. As the ground rumbled and stones cracked, something else shattered deep within the center of Jewish religious life, something invisible yet undeniable. Matthew 27:51 declares, "The veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom." This wasn't some decorative drapery fluttering in the breeze. This was a towering curtain, 60 feet high, thick as a man's. And, woven with solemnity and purpose, it stood as a divine line in the sand, here and no farther, and suddenly it was gone. But this tear didn't begin from below, where hands could reach. It began at the top. Heaven's hand gripped what man had feared to touch, and in one violent, sacred act, God tore apart what separated him from his creation. For centuries, no one entered beyond that veil except the high priest, and only once a year, with trembling hands and sacrificial blood, stepping in. Without permission meant certain death, but now that line had been erased. Imagine being a priest in that moment. You're chanting prayers. The incense is thick in the air. Everything is as it always has been, until it's not. The floor shakes. You hear a sound, tearing deep and dreadful. You turn, And there it is, the veil, ripped open, the most holy place exposed to daylight, to human eyes. What do? You've been taught your entire life that crossing that threshold uninvited meant divine wrath. And now God has ripped the curtain himself. This wasn't just shocking, it was the collapse of a system. No more separation, no more exclusivity, no more ritual walls between man and God. The tearing of the veil was heaven's announcement. Access has been granted. Jesus, the final sacrifice, had paid the price. The path was clear, the barrier destroyed. And for those clinging to religion and power, it was terrifying. For the religious leaders, this wasn't liberation, it was devastation. Their authority rested on the veil. Their entire structure depended on it. Only they could approach God. Only they could mediate. Only they could control the sacred. And now God had declared no more. He wasn't confined to the shadows of the temple. He was walking into the streets. Can you feel the tremble in their hearts, the unraveling of control, the fear of a God who could no longer be contained? And yet, for us, it's the most glorious fear we've ever known, because that torn veil means the presence of God is no longer behind rules, rituals, or bloodlines. It's available to you, to me, regardless of our shame, our mistakes, our brokenness. Jesus tore the veil not just to give us access, but to invite us in, daily, boldly, fully. But let us not forget the cost. That access came at the price of blood. It was purchased in agony, granted through a cross, echoed by an earthquake, marked by a torn veil. God is not hiding anymore. He's close. He's calling. And sometimes that nearness is more terrifying than distance. Because now there's no excuse, no more waiting, no more hiding behind someone else's faith. So I ask you, if the veil has already been torn, then what's keeping you on the outside? Number 3, darkness fell when light chose silence. Number 3, darkness fell. Midday became midnight. At the hour when the sun should have stood at its highest, when light should have ruled the skies, the world was swallowed by shadow. Matthew, the 27:45, records that from the 6th to the 9th hour, darkness covered the land. That's noon to 3 p.m., the brightest stretch of the day. And yet, in that sacred window, daylight vanished, light recoiled, and no one, not the priests, not the crowd, not even the battle-scarred Roman guards, could explain what had just begun. This wasn't a solar eclipse. That would have been impossible. The Passover always took place during a full moon. Scientifically, the skies had no reason to darken. Spiritually, they had every reason. This wasn't a cloud passing. It was a grief pressing. This darkness didn't just dim sight, it suffocated hearts. It was as if heaven itself held its breath in horror. This was mourning, not just man's, but creation's. The silence of angels, the cry of justice, the moment sin was poured out like poison, visible, violent, and complete. Imagine the scene. 1 minute you're shielding your eyes from the sun. The next, it's like the sky has been smothered. Darkness falls with no warning, no logic. Birds fall silent. Conversations dissolve into whispers. The crowd stiffens. People glance upward, confused, dreadful. The center of it all, a single, dying man on a cross. This wasn't an accident. It was a divine declaration. Throughout Scripture, darkness is never random. In Egypt, a plague of darkness came just before death swept over the firstborn. Now, at Calvary, darkness falls again. Only this time, the firstborn of heaven is the one to die. Judgment had come, but it didn't fall where it should have. It fell on Jesus. In those 3 dreadful hours, Jesus bore the full weight of every transgression, every betrayal, every wicked thought, every secret shame. The sins of generations crushed down on him. And as the Father turned his face away, the Son stood utterly alone. The light of the world went dim. That's why Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It wasn't a poetic echo. It was agony incarnate. He was feeling the raw, full separation from the Father, and the skies echoed his. Pain, This was more than atmospheric, it was spiritual. A planet without God is more than dark. It's desolate, cold, hollow. And for 3 hours the world got a glimpse of what life without divine presence really feels like. And here's the part that should shake us the most. Many still didn't get it. They stood in the dark, they saw the signs, they heard the silence, and still their hearts stayed closed. Just like today. We live in a world full of light, yet many choose the shadows. We stand in broad daylight, yet walk in spiritual midnight. We see the signs and still shrug them off. But Jesus stepped into that darkness so we wouldn't have to live in it. He was abandoned so we could be embraced. He allowed the light to be turned off so it would never go out inside you. So I ask you, what part of your soul is still covered in shadow? What secret corners have you allowed to remain dim? You may be walking through life under the sun, but is your heart stuck in night? The light went out. Once, but only so it could shine in you forever. Don't settle for the cold comfort of shadows. Step into the light he died to give. Let that light break through your midnight and bring morning to your soul. Number 4. The tombs broke open. Death lost its grip. Number 4. The tombs broke open. The dead rose, and they walked among the living. As if a quaking earth, a darkened sky, and a torn temple veil weren't enough to shake the soul. Matthew 27:52-53 gives us one more miracle, one so haunting. It defies imagination. The tombs broke open, and the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. Let that sink in. The moment Jesus died, death didn't just shudder, it began to fall apart. This wasn't symbolic. This wasn't allegory or dream. This was graves, actual physical tombs cracking open, and the people inside them, the saints who had died waiting for the promise of God, stood up. Their cold bodies received breath, their eyes opened, and they walked. Picture it, days after Jesus' death, Jerusalem is heavy with silence. Whispers fill the streets about the darkness, the earthquake, the torn veil. But then something unimaginable happens. You see someone you once buried, a relative, a rabbi, a righteous man from long ago, standing, walking, speaking, maybe even glowing. Your breath catches, your knees weaken. This isn't horror, this is awe, holy terror. We're not told how many, just many. Not everyone, not strangers, but the righteous, the ones who had lived and died in faith. As if the death of Jesus didn't only split open the temple, it split the grave. And they didn't rise immediately. The tombs opened the moment Jesus died. But the saints stepped out only after his resurrection, because he had to be the first, the forerunner, the firstborn from the dead. But even before he rose, death was already losing its grip. The earthquake wasn't just shaking buildings, it was shaking death itself. These risen saints were not just a miracle, they were a message, a preview, a divine whisper of what was to come. Jesus had said, "I am the resurrection and the life." And now, in the streets of Jerusalem, that promise was beginning to unfold. The barrier between life and death had been pierced. Eternity had leaked into time. And this moment speaks to our greatest fear, the fear of death. For generations, humanity has lived beneath its shadow, every heartbeat echoing toward an inevitable end. But on the day Jesus died, something impossible happened. Death began to work backward. The grave trembled, its doors creaked, and something holy stepped out. This wasn't spectacle, it was prophecy fulfilled. It was heaven declaring, even death must bow to the Son, and if it couldn't hold those saints, it can't hold you either. So let me ask, what part of you is buried? What dream, what calling, what piece of your soul feels sealed away in stone? Because the cross wasn't just about the forgiveness of sin, it was about the resurrection of all that's been buried inside you. Hope, joy, purpose, breath, life. When Jesus died, the grave cracked open, and if you let him, he'll step into your tomb too. Because when Christ breathed his last, death received its first wound, and it's been bleeding out ever since. Number 5. The soldiers trembled when the killers became witnesses. Number 5. The soldiers trembled. The enemies of God believed. No, one expected it. Not from them. These were Roman soldiers, trained in cruelty, desensitized by death. Execution was their profession. Pain was routine. They had crucified hundreds, maybe thousands. Jesus was just another name on a list, another rebel nailed to wood. They stood beneath the cross as if it meant nothing, arms crossed, faces blank, eyes cold. They had mocked him, gambled over his robe, watched him bleed like they'd watched so many others. They didn't care who he claimed to be. They had orders and they followed them. But then something shifted. Matthew 27:54 tells us, when the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." Pause there. Let that land. These weren't the faithful. They weren't followers. These were the very hands that hammered the nails, and yet they were the first to confess what the religious elite refused to see. Something pierced them that no sword ever could. Truth. The same men who mocked now trembled. Why? Because they had never seen anything like this. They had overseen crucifixions before, but this was different. The darkness, the quake, the cry from the cross, the unnatural weight in the air. It wasn't human, it was holy. And in that sacred moment, the mask of indifference cracked, their walls fell, their bravado collapsed, the killer became the witness. What the Pharisees scoffed at, these Gentile soldiers, proclaimed, "Surely this was the Son of God." This wasn't a casual remark, it was revelation. A Roman, raised in paganism, loyal to Caesar, declared the divinity of the man he just helped kill. The truth leapt from the mouth of an enemy, breaking through years of brutality and pride. That is the power of the cross. It reaches even the hardest hearts, even the bloodstained, even the mockers. This is what grace looks like. It doesn't just embrace the broken, it reaches for the ones who broke him. And this isn't just a line in an ancient book. This is a mirror held up to you. Because maybe you've laughed off the gospel. Maybe you've rolled your eyes, walked away, closed your ears. Maybe you've stood near the cross all your life and never really looked. But then the sky darkens, the earth shakes, something stirs inside, and suddenly you feel it, the weight of truth pressing in on your soul. And now, just like that centurion, you stand at a crossroads. Will you keep pretending it doesn't matter? Or will you fall to your knees and whisper what your heart already knows? Surely this was the Son of God, because here's the terrifying beauty of it. There's no one too far. No heart too hard, no past too bloody. If the grace of Jesus reached the men who drove the nails, it can reach you. And maybe it's already reaching. Maybe today is your moment, the one where indifference breaks and confession begins. So what will you do with this Jesus? Ignore him or believe, like a soldier at the foot of the cross, and finally say the words that change everything? Surely he is the Son of God. Conclusion. If creation trembled, what will you do? We've just journeyed through 5 earth-shattering, soul-stirring miracles that unfolded the very moment Jesus breathed his last. Events that weren't just strange, they were sacred. They weren't symbolic, they were seismic. The world didn't just witness a death, it absorbed a divine detonation that split history in two. The earth convulsed beneath the cross because it couldn't bear the weight of sin now resting on the shoulders of the sinless Son. The temple veil tore like thunder because God had removed the separation. No more barriers, no more rituals, just grace written in blood. Darkness fell at noon because the light of the world had been willingly extinguished for you. The tombs burst open because death had been disarmed, its chains shattered by the author of life. And the soldiers who drove the nails, they trembled, not from guilt, but from revelation. They saw what religion missed. They saw who he truly was. All of creation responded. Skies turned black, rocks split, graves gave way. Even Rome's hardest hearts broke under the weight of what they had seen. But now comes the silence. And it's not the silence of heaven, it's ours. Because while nature had no choice but to react, we do. And that should shake us more than any quake. These signs weren't meant to entertain. They were divine wake-up calls, alarms sounding. Through history, summons to the soul, they were meant to pull us out of ritual and into reality, out of comfort and into conviction, out of religion and into relationship. Jesus didn't die in secret. He died at the center of the world, visible, brutal, public. And the world itself couldn't stay still. So what about you? You've heard the story. You've felt the trembling beneath the surface of your spirit. You've seen the signs both then and now. Will you ignore it? Will you keep walking, unmoved? Or will you do what even a battle-hardened soldier did, drop to your knees, feel the gravity of it all, and say, what can no longer be denied? Truly, this was the Son of God. Because here's what you need to know. The moment Jesus died, everything changed. The only question left is, have you? Oh, ChatGPT Dees, if this message moved your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a truth that could change your life. Leave a comment and share your thoughts. We'd love to hear your voice. And if you believe someone else needs to hear this, share this video with them. You never know how one simple act could awaken a heart.